When Caleb Kane opened up YouTube, what he expected to find was entertainment for the afternoon. But what he actually found was the beginning of a rabbit hole that would take him on a terrible journey from 8 months, transforming him from a moderate college student to one that openly supported neo-Nazi ideologies and defended movements online that had historically led to the deaths of tens of millions of people. Unfortunately, what started off as just watching one right-wing video turned into another, and another, and another, more extreme every time. And though it took him 8 months, in just under a year, he eventually became radicalized beyond the point of, I'm sure, anybody in this room. But unfortunately, what happened to Caleb is also happening to our society as a whole. Because while we like to think of ourselves as moderates, even if we're on one side or the other of the political spectrum, in our country since the 1980s, the number of Americans who believe that the other political side is not just wrong, but actively morally evil, has tripled, up to 80% in the last year. It's clear that in our society today, clear dividing lines have been drawn, with tribal politics on both poles of the sides. And for millions of Americans who are working together on critical issues like we've heard tonight, such as climate change and the war in Ukraine, that require real debate, compromise, and understanding the ideals that each and every one of us hold. This polarization is driving us apart from the solution, not towards it. And while starting this speech with an example of a Nazi may seem a little bit extreme, the fact that a study in 2017 revealed that nearly 9% of Americans, which extrapolates to 22 million of us, believe that holding neo-Nazi views is acceptable, it's crucial to understand that while his views are extreme, the path that he took to radicalization is increasingly becoming normalized in our society. Now, starting this speech with an example of a literal Nazi should send up some alarm bells in the audience. If it doesn't, maybe look inward on that one. But for most of us, we can have a hard time conceptualizing just why polarization is bad, because aside from the very far ends of our political spectrums, most of us tend to think about positive polarization, of ideologies battling in the market of ideas, of Americans choosing their side, and attempting to sway others towards what they believe. But to understand why that model doesn't line up with our political reality today, we need to understand how American voters are making their choice at the ballot box. As a poll from 2016 revealed, just 6 years ago, only about a third of Americans can name the 3 branches of our federal government, something that a 6th grader in civics class ought to be able to know. Unfortunately, since 2016, this number has actually gone down and revealed that the vast majority of American voters aren't casting their ballot based on ideology or policy, but rather on the party that they chose, maybe, when they were just in high school. And this means that they're not voting on the issues, but based on partisan identities formed long ago. In fact, in the 2020 election, from elections from presidency all the way down to city council, researchers at Harvard University found that nearly 85% of votes could be correlated directly with partisan affiliation. And while, for some of us, we might vote Democrat or Republican down the ticket, for the millions of Americans who are moderate, extreme, or on another axis altogether, it's clear that an 85% correlation is far too high, and that Americans aren't voting based on what they believe, but based on fear of the opposition, not championing their ideas, but attempting to take down the ideas of others. And this isn't just a problem for political science nerds like me, who want us to be having debates all day about politics. It directly links into bad governance, because let's think about just what the role of a representative is. Well, many representatives go to Congress with noble intentions, advocating for their community, making change. Fundamentally, every member of Congress' job and every politician around the world is re-election, whether for cynical reasons, that politicians just want to continue to be in control, or because of the more noble pursuit, the idea that you can't enact any change if you haven't been voted into office. Politicians follow where the political winds blow. And given that even though most Americans are unsatisfied with Congress's performance, the House of Representatives maintains a nearly 95% re-election rate, it's clear that our representative has stumbled onto something insidious The idea that they can stir up the political fears of Americans, that they can divide us, and then just ride off of that. And it's not just Americans that are imagining it. We know that most of us don't believe that Congress are advocating for us. In fact, congressional approval ratings today sit just above 10%. And we're not imagining it. For almost every session of Congress over the last 25 years, Congress has passed less and less of Americans' top priorities of legislation, meaning that Congress is actively stirring up our fears and then not even delivering on those basic promises. Today in our country, we see increased turnout in almost every single election, such as the 2020 presidential election, which saw Joe Biden delivered a historic victory, and even Donald Trump getting more than he did in 2016. But it seems in our political landscape today, Americans are more engaged than they ever have been, but less interested in the actual political process. Unsurprisingly, 64% of Americans around the country, a number that has grown year after year after year, have said that they like the idea, theoretically of course, of a major third party breaking onto the scene. But to understand why Congress doesn't serve us and why the people don't course correct, it's critical to understand where Americans form political ideologies. And as it turns out, it happens in high school auditoriums just like this. For nearly 60% of Americans, partisan affiliation is locked in at high school or college level, which means that what we teach our students in schools just like these are critical to determining our partisan political landscape for the future. And while nearly 95% of students at public schools around the country will receive some form of civics education, oftentimes it focuses less on partisan and ideology and more on just simple government structures, teaching students how the Supreme Court works or how a bill becomes a law, but not how to actually understand an argument, argue for both sides of the political spectrum, and make up their mind on partisan identities. Because of this, many students just take on the partisan character of their parents, their friends, or the environment around them, then apply that knowledge to civics class. And the fact of the matter is that the civics class we have fail at the one job that they're attempting to do, as only 25% of students who take them can demonstrate proficiency of even the basics 5 years after they graduate. It's clear that the United States today is in a pivotal moment with education, where we can choose to reform how we teach politics to our students, issuing textbooks about how the Supreme Court works in favor of understanding how the political process actually functions, how Americans come up with their views, how they cast their ballots, and giving our kids a real future to believe in politicians and not just fall into a cycle of fear. But these theories about political education have been around almost since our country was founded. Yet, over the last more than 200 years, we've still had a two-party system, as no third-party candidate has ever been elected to the presidency. So, it's clear that while Americans want change, there must be some systemic barrier stopping them from achieving that. And unfortunately, it's in the very way we vote. In the United States, for most votes around the country, we use what's called first-past-the-post voting, the idea that whatever candidate gets the most amount of votes wins. But looking at this over several election cycles, it is easy to see why that makes a two-party system, no matter how bad it is, absolutely inevitable. In a first election, where say the Democrats get 30% of the vote, the Republicans 40%, and a socialist party a minority, the Republicans would win the election without getting a majority of the vote. And so, in the next round, the socialists might want to vote for the Democrats this time around because they have the majority. And even if they're not getting all of their policies fixed, they're fearful of what the opposition can do. Once again, it comes into a cycle of fear in our politics where Americans feel that they're not voting for their future, but voting against some sort of perceived catastrophe. But first-past-the-post voting isn't the only way to do it. In counties, states, and even countries around the world, we're seeing the implementation of a new system called ranked choice voting, where as many candidates who want to can be on the ballot, and we can rank them. So, if we vote for a third party who fails to garner a significant portion of the vote, their votes are then transferred to the two-party candidate of our choice. And considering that 64% of Americans want there to be another choice on the stage, it's clear that these third parties would likely garner support and help to break us out of the polarizing two-party model that we're in today. But this isn't the only model for looking at our politics. will we understand how we conceptualize our political views in high schools just like this, and how we express them at the ballot box. The truth of the matter is that politics is an ever-evolving phenomenon. And so, we have to understand how we treat ongoing political education in our society by looking at a case study, the presidential debates. Well, most of us think of the presidential debates as an impartial organization that invites the candidates to debate in front of Americans. In reality, it's an organization not controlled by the government, not controlled by a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, but rather a committee committed by Republicans and Democrats that has high barriers to entry. For example, in the 2016 election, when Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson met every single requirement to be invited, the committee simply raised the bars to entry because they weren't interested in giving Americans a choice. They were interested in giving them the illusion of choice, interested in pitting their fears against the opposition and driving them back to the same two parties, time and time again. And we don't just see this in presidential debates. We see this in the way that the media treats our politics, treating it like a two-horse race. We see this in the way that we talk to each other about politics. You're not voting for Biden, you're voting against Trump. Or in some parts of this country, the other way around. And so we're redoing our politics to make sure that we have real choice in our country. Doesn't just come from altering our institutions and how we teach our children, but how we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis. And so, although across the country, we see political tensions running high almost every single election, when's the last time that you didn't hear this is the most important election of our lives? It's clear that the United States has an actual choice to make. We can stay in the cycle of fear, political division, and going to the two extremes, or we can make real reforms to our society, how we understand the political spectrum. Maybe just allow the United States to harness polarization for good. Allow it to truly be a battle of ideologies, where Americans are picking the ideas they love, not the ones they hate. Thank you.